7.5 FM WRUU.org. We are Savannah Sonics Community Radio with Global Soul. And Sebastian, you mind playing a little bit for us? Here's Sebastian Best, everybody. Awesome. Thank you, Bass. And everybody, you're tuning in just now. I appreciate you listening today. We are, an all community radio station and all volunteer. And we have like over 60 hosts, different shows and things like that. But we can't do it without you. So if you would consider going to WRUU.org, and even if you make a $1 donation, every dollar helps. If we had like 1,500 people do a $1 donation, we'd have all of our monthly expenses covered just about. So we appreciate you. And for those who are tuning in today, I am speaking with my friend and author Nicole Givens Kurtz. And welcome back, Nicole. Thank you for being here today.
Yep, thanks for having me. So,
we were talking last hour about like making change and how can people, make authentic change and stuff like that. I appreciate you sharing that, and I appreciate you being like a vocal champion of, promoting the African Diaspora. Am I saying that correctly? Diaspora?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. The African Diaspora storytelling. Can you please tell people like what the African Diaspora is? Because I don't feel like I can really explain exactly, what it is.
Okay. So the African Diaspora is it's everywhere that the mid-Atlantic slave trade happened. So there is this disbursement of Africans all over the place, like in Europe, the Caribbean, the United States, and so it's their descendants, and so it's people who were displaced due to slavery. And so those descendants are considered members of the African diaspora.
Diaspora. Okay, so I was saying a diaspora. Okay.
I've heard it said both ways, so.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I was wondering because, like, and it's so crazy because you were the first person that ever introduced me to that term, and since then I've checked out different stuff, and there's a lot of really cool stuff out there. I feel like there are a lot of neat and interesting different, like you said, different stories and things like that. I mean, like from comic books to screenplays to books. I mean, like stories. There's a lot of new podcasts coming up that are out there. And then the other thing too, like I've been checking out, but it's called Clubhouse, and
yep.
Are you on Clubhouse?
I don't have. I do not have an iPhone. So I'm an Android girl. So
well, they probably rolled out for Android eventually, but there are a lot of like African American community groups in there, and so I mean, like there are people out there that that there's a need for it. If there weren't a need for it, they wouldn't be here, So I feel like it's really important, to try to do, like on my part, honestly, I try to be helpful, and I try to provide a platform, and I'll try to share and do what I can. Not because I'm trying to like get boost creds or anything like that, just because I like to see my friends succeed. I don't know. It's just one of those things. Like I don't want to pat on the back or anything like that, but I feel like if more people did that kind of stuff, that it would help a lot.
Oh yeah.
You had mentioned also the LGBTQIA community last hour, And so one of the my authors, Mark Allen Gunnels, he's going to be the first book that I publish outside of the anthology. And he was talking about like we had a conversation. He's gay, and he lives with his husband, and they he was talking to me when he was talking about the story I did, and he asked me, he was like, hey, is this a problem if my characters are gay? And I was like, no, and he told me that there have been publishers in the past that they had a problem, where it's like nobody wanted to read, like an all gay cast or whatever. And it didn't even really dawn on me like the significance of it, because obviously, not necessarily biases, but like not being exposed to, certain cultures or whatever. So I didn't know that, like, I'm kind of new to fiction with the horror writing and all that. I didn't know that that was an issue. And so that was something for me that was kind of an eye opener. I was like, well, because I really didn't think twice about it. I figured, because I knew he was gay, I figured that, if he wanted to write about gay characters, he would write about gay characters or whatever. And I didn't have a problem with that. But I didn't realize that other people in the publishing industry do. And I'm like, and it's I don't want to belittle or take away from, like, African Americans, but in the same vein, it's almost like the same kind of thing, like where it's like if you're not aware of it, you don't know that there's an issue or a problem where people are like, well, we don't want that. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. And it's like, well, how do you, so I want to ask you, like, how do you kind of get around that? Because, there's a lot of people I feel like that they don't have bad intentions or, they don't have ill will or anything like that, but they're just not around it. And, I know last hour we were talking about, like, oh, you can Google it and you can look for new things or whatever. But it's like, if you don't know that there's a problem, how do you find out that there's a problem? Or how do you find out, like if you're not aware of it, how do you find out?
So I have gay friends. That's how I know about things. Again, that's your pool of friends and the people.
I have gay friends too. I just didn't know about the horror thing.
Oh no!
Yeah,
so I knew that. I knew that because I have gay author friends.
Right.
Who talk about. I also have gay friends who aren't authors, but my gay author friends talk about that too. About there being like this reputation, and industry, like I know Fire magazine producers, like they used to produce a report on how many e-zines and magazines published Black authors during a year. Mm-hmm. And they would publish that report, like, this magazine didn't publish any, this one published 12 out of how many all the authors they published. So they started kind of producing industry reports. But because I have gay author friends, I kind of knew, because we talk about that, about getting published and about the challenges of being published. And they would often lament how difficult it was to kind of clear certain publications, gatekeepers, because their characters were openly gay. Mm-hmm. And so how do you, as an average reader, find out about those things? You probably know how difficult, if you're gay and looking for gay stories, you know how difficult it is to find those stories. You could probably glean from that there might be some issues with publishing them, right? Mm-hmm. But if you're a writer and you're a gay writer, you probably know that because you've submitted stories. But if you're not in that demographic, such as you're not gay, and you haven't spoken to gay authors and you're not looking for a gay text, then you don't know about those things. And unless you read, again, outside, or you're on Twitter or social media, and you are part of writer circles that are, that talk about those things, and you don't know. And it's I want to give the caveat here, Adam, that you can't know everything. No,
I know that. I know that.
It's just so much information, right?
It's just like I'm just trying to ask, like, baby steps, because you've been in publishing a lot longer than I have, and it's like, how do we make those changes? How do we step forward and make
so how do you make those changes? The same way you do with anything. You and I and a few other publishers put in this has been a hot button issue lately, and among some authors, where, like, for example, Lightspeed had a week or 2 weeks in February where they only accepted submissions from Black, Indian people of color.
Mm-hmm.
That's all they took, and they got some. Well, why is it just special for them? And they're like, we want to make sure that we get those submissions, that we hear those diverse voices, right? We'll open it up to everybody, on the 8th, but for these 7 days, it's just for these groups. And so that right there will clue you in as an author and as a publisher like myself that these are voices that are underrepresented.
Right,
And
right.
so one of the things people have done to kind of change that is what Lightspeed and Faya. Faya is a Black speculative fiction magazine. That's all they publish. Um, and people like Lightspeed and Strange Horizons and a few other e-zines have said exclusively they've done magazines that were exclusively like disabled people destroy science fiction, or LGBTQ destroy science fiction. They've done very specific calls for those underrepresented and marginalized voices. Fireside has also done in the past, have done that as well. And I think that's how you change the tide. You actively seek out
Mm-hmm.
those diverse voices and let those authors know this is a safe publication for you. We want your story. And we want
I
to hear
love
your
that.
voice. And so those are the kinds of steps that publishers can take
Mm-hmm.
that can help kind of provide uh, more stories and more opportunities for those authors. And so those stories become more published and become more plentiful. They find more readers, and thus you end up lifting all voices, right? That way.
I love that. I mean, I feel like that's what you're saying is a really great way, and it's not just I feel like when I'm looking at publishing, you know, I see a lot of people that are marginalized or just ignored, straight up ignored. Um, and I do notice that there are a lot of indie publishers who are, that's again kind of like going back to the music thing last hour. That a lot of the indie publishers that they're saying, hey, there's a need here. If there weren't a need, people wouldn't want it, right? It wouldn't be it wouldn't rise in the market. It just wouldn't. Stuff that's good is going to rise, and but
Mm-hmm.
at the same time, it's like, well, again with the bootstrap thing, like what if you never started with boots? Like how do you pull yourself up from your bootstraps if you never start off with boots? And so if there's not a platform out there, or it's not being, I don't know. I like that these publications are saying, hey, we're going to do this. We're going to open it up just for African American authors for submissions for this or whatever. Because I kind of look at it like if you look at the overall populace, you can go by demographics or whatever, but if you look at the overall populace and people are saying, hey, we want more of this group or whatever, or some of the publications or whatever that are like, hey, well, we haven't really been diverse in the past and we want to change it up now. We want to be more diverse. So that's what we're going to focus on. Is we're going to say, hey, we're going to focus on these authors and their stories and stuff like that. Do you feel like that's good, or I mean, like, you feel like it's like a surface change or like a authentic change? I mean, like, have you seen the same kind of thing, like kind of like what we were talking about the BLM and not actually supporting African Americans? I mean, like, because I've seen a lot of good stuff lately with indies, but I really haven't. I don't read a whole lot about the industry like numbers and stuff like that. But I would like to see more diversity, and I would like to see more real change, not just like, hey, we're just going to do a flash in the pan type thing.
So in terms of speculative fiction, I think I definitely think there are some publications who are very devoted to actually making authentic change and avenues and inroads and offering opportunities. I know Serial Box um, does a lot of looking for diverse authors for their stuff, for their publications and stuff. So I definitely think there's a So, I mean, it's with anything, right? You have some groups or some publications who are very much devoted to invoking change. And then you have some who are like, we have our core readership. This is what they expect from us. We're not deviating from that. And so, it's a business. And so you have some companies who are very business minded, right? Like you have Netflix who like said, not only do we value Black voices and we believe Black Lives Matter, we're going to devote X number of dollars to HBCUs to develop screenwriters and directors, right? So that we can have those diverse stories. So they're definitely putting their money where their mouth is. And so you have some public publishers, both indie and part of larger mid-list and some of the big four and their subsidiaries, who are like, okay, we're definitely going to take this seriously and put our money where our mouth is, right? We're going to pay diverse authors for their stories. We're going to, but not only that, we're going to do a scholarship at Clarion, or we're going to do, so there are definitely places where they're like, some agents, even some literary agents are like, okay, from this period to this period, I'm only taking pitches from, BI, POC, and LGBTQ, or what have you. And so you definitely see some people trying to make definitive changes that are not just surface level stuff. But with anything, it's not everybody. So you do have that happening, right? But again, it's an ongoing battle. And I think that sometimes we get tired of the constant battle. We're like, okay, we've reached this area, we're good. And then people kind of fall back, right? But you can't stop fighting because it's an ongoing battle, right? Definitely take breaks and rest and mind your mental health, but then get back out there. And so I think that's kind of what we need. But there are publications who are very much, I think it's not easier, but I think indie publishers like yourself, and I know Milton Davis and Zola Knight's company, and Rosaria, and some other publishers like Rachel Brune's Crone Press, and so we definitely can take greater risk than, because we are small and flexible, right, and agile. But I don't think the big lumbering big four are willing to take that risk because they have many more millions in place than we do.
Oh yeah, and that's the thing too, is like, how do we get there? How do we get to where the Netflixes are doing that? I mean, I feel like Netflix is, that's a great step. I saw something with Disney as well, that they're doing something like that, and I mean, like, that to me was like, wow, Disney's doing it. That means that's the way the industry's going. And it's nice to see that. I go back to music and entertainment and sports and stuff like that, because writing and books and television, a lot of stuff is like Marvel and things like that. Comic books, books that inspire movies and things like that. So I feel like it's very tied in. Writing and screen. I guess they don't really do a whole lot of spec screen plays anymore because there's just so many people out there writing it or whatever. But I feel like it's still, the publishing industry is still behind, like where people are and what they want. And I don't know. I mean, like, I kind of feel like if it's one of those things where like they've never really invested the money into it, and they justify it by saying, "Hey, well, we don't really have these sales." It's like, well, if you never really started, how are you going to have sales?
Right. Oh, it definitely is a catch-22.
I mean, it's one of those things. It's like, look. I mean, I keep going back to Black Panther, the movie. $1 billion, $1 billion. And it was a huge smash hit. It wasn't the first African American superhero to be on the screen.
No, that was Blade.
Well, even before
to
that,
make money.
But that was like the first. It's like the first $1 billion movie. I think I want to say I don't even know. I can't remember, because at the time I remember they were talking about like it broke, like the Avengers came out and then Black Panther came out. And it broke, Black Panther broke the record for the Avengers And like it's like, well, what? You can't say that people don't want that kind of content, because they do.
Right.
They. I mean, look at culturally, like everybody follows like what people do, and Black culture, rap, music, entertainment. It's almost like, why is the publishing industry still behind? I've never understood that. I really have never understood it.
I think again it goes back to who makes the deals, right? And so it goes back to who's in the room. Not to quote Hamilton, but who's in the room when it happens. And
that makes so much sense. I mean, like you said earlier, if you're all sitting in the same room and they all look the same, you got to diversify.
Yeah, and that's the problem. Like, they don't have, like I said, acquisition editors at larger publishing houses. Who are they? What do they look like? Right. And so that's what are their beliefs? And so people go, oh, it doesn't matter, but it does matter.
It does matter, though.
Because if I'm reading a story and I can't connect to that story because my Midwestern white upbringing is blocking, I'm expecting certain social cues to be a part of the story, but the story is written by someone who was reared in a different culture, then I'm not going to be able to sync that, right? Unless I have done the work on myself to confront my own internal biases, right?
See, and I kind of agree with that. I don't mean to interject here. No, I kind of agree with that in a way, and I kind of don't in a way, because going back to rap, you see a lot of suburban kids who listen to rap, right? And like they try to adopt that culture, right? And so like I feel like that and maybe we're probably talking about apples and oranges when it comes to that, because I'm not talking about like the decision making. I'm talking about like them not being able to.
I'm talking about the decision making.
Yeah, well, here's where it ties in for me. With not being able to identify with that, like they can identify with the stories, they can identify with the music, and they like that or whatever, right? But when it comes to the decision making, it's like I feel like it goes back to that, like you said earlier about a business. It's like, well, can we take this risk? It's like, well, if you never did it before, how are you going to know? And if they don't want to take the risk, and they're, that echo chamber that they've got going on, making those, bad decisions or poor decisions or whatever. It's like they know. I mean, like they know the stories are good. They know the stories are popular or whatever, but they still make those decisions.
I don't think they know that. And so here's why I don't think they know that. Well, first of all, music and books are, they're so for music, you got to remember that white suburban kids didn't get into rap until gangster rap had crossed over to be mainstream. And that was primarily because African Americans made it popular, right? And so in many things, in many respects, it's the consumption of Black commodities, right? Hairstyles, clothing styles, sneakers, music. They want Black commodities, but they don't always like Black people.
That's something that's always blown my mind. It's something that's always blown my mind. It's like, how can you like the culture, but you don't like the people?
Yeah, but books are very different. Books, and so editors who are reading books are not, and I hate to say this because they're not popular commodities, right? Anyone can buy sneakers, but not everyone is going to buy books.
Right.
They have a very different demographic, and their sales model is very different. So you see them publishing books that they know only 300 people in the world are going to buy, but because of the prestige or the it's literary, right? And this guy is a literary author and he's really popular, but it's only for these 300 people. So they will sell. Books are not always driven by sales, I guess is what I'm trying to say. Because they will print limited run things that they know are only going to sell 50 copies, but they're going to, because they're limited edition, it's this, it's that. So it's not really about number of sales versus this for books. Books are a very different commodity. And so I think that when you have decision makers who are saying, I don't agree with, I can't find value or connect with this customer, they are with this story or this protagonist, I think that is one person making that decision, right? Versus a studio of producers, right? you have one person, maybe three people at a publishing house making that decision about who's reading slush, right? So I definitely
That's a
think
good point.
that, so it's a very different manner in which those things are held. And if this, in this publishing house, these three people have similar backgrounds, they may not all be able to overcome
Yeah.
their bringing and what they expect in a good, it's like in a good story. What makes a story good depends on the people who are judging it. And if those people are all the same and have similar taste in what is good, anything that doesn't conform to their preconceived notion of what a good story is, it's not going to make the cut.
Yeah. Oh, I agree. I agree with it. That's why I was saying earlier about, or asking earlier about, like, what if they're not even aware that there's a problem? You know.
So that's why you have magazines, right?
Yeah.
Like Fire, or you have publishing reports that pointed out and call attention to these biases in publishing, and said, "Hey guys, we have a problem."
Mm-hmm.
And so, in the same way you would with any doctor, hey, we have a cancer in our industry, we have a cancer in our body, we have a failing here, right? And so you have groups that do that call attention to these deficits, so that with the hopes that by calling attention to it and diagnosing the illness or diagnosing the problem, we can address it. And so we've been doing that. I think publishing has been trying to address that for the last like 10, 12 years. I've seen it for the last 10 or 12 years, just the ongoing conversations. Mm-hmm. You saw it with RWA this year in terms of diversity and their lack of and tone deafness. You saw, I know that SIFWA, Science Fiction Writers of America, has had a similar reckoning in the past 10 years of addressing their internal biases and racism within the ranks of their authors and their organization and how they go about business. And I know that Horror Writers of America, Horror Writers Association, has also had a similar conversation. So you see these membership groups, you see these reports that are coming out in the industry that are saying, hey, we have always done it this way, but as we change and evolve, so should the way that we handle readers, because readers are also changing and evolving. We're becoming more global, we're becoming more self-aware, we're becoming more interested in diverse voices than we were 20 years ago. And so we need to pivot to address that. It's, like I said, because smaller and mid-list presses are a lot more agile, we can do that faster than, say, the big four can.
Speaking of the HWA, too, just congratulations on winning that diversity grant, too.
Right. So thank you. So that's another one of those things that an organization has said, look, we need to help amplify those marginalized voices in horror. How do we do that? Well, we offer grants to, offer these grants that can help diverse authors get on their feet. They can use that money I'm using my money to go to class. I'm using my money to make connections, to go to StokerCon. So I'm doing the kind of, and other people have used their funds, their diversity grants for other things. But like SIFWA had a week or 3 weeks, or I think all this month, if you're a Black science fiction writer, and they will pay your dues.
Oh, wow.
Right? And so they are removing what has historically been kind of stumbling blocks to getting in their organization, right?
Yeah, the barriers, the gatekeeping type stuff.
Yeah, and so they have, and I know that they have a diversity panel of volunteers. They have lots of things that SIFWA is doing, because I'm an active member of SIFWA. I'm an active member of Horror Writers Association as well. And I know that both organizations are doing what they can to kind of amplify those voices that have been marginalized for so long. And those, again, that goes back to putting your money where your mouth is. It's not just giving lip service. Mm-hmm. It's actually trying to nurture and grow those other voices, because you do want them to be heard and you do want those stories to be told. And you're removing the stumbling blocks from people who have not been able to do that in the past. And so that's a way to make an authentic change. That's how you do it.
I love it. I love it. Do you feel like that you're seeing, and we got to do the break in about a minute, but do you feel like you are seeing more authentic change? I know you just gave several examples, but do you feel like that it is it's going to last?
For those organizations, I do, because they're making changes that are systemic.
Good. All right, hold that thought. I'm going to do the station break, everybody. Here we go.
Say that WRUU is a community radio station. It doesn't just mean that we invite the community to create programming. And it doesn't just mean that we are a voice for the community. It also means that we are counting on the community to keep us going. And you are the community. Almost all of our modest budget comes from small annual or monthly donations from listeners like you. You get to enjoy our community-focused programming because many others have stepped forward to do their part. Now do your part by joining our community of listener donors. Go to wruu.org right now and make a one-time or monthly donation. And thank you for supporting Savannah's community radio station, 107.5 FM.
This is a message from the Georgia State Department of Public Health. There is a State of Georgia hotline people can call with questions or if they think they may have been exposed to the COVID-19 virus. It is 1-844-442-2681. If you believe you're experiencing symptoms of COVID-19 or have been exposed to the novel coronavirus, please contact your primary care doctor, an urgent care clinic, or your local federally qualified healthcare center. Please do not show up at an emergency room or healthcare facility unannounced. More information can be found at dph.georgia.gov. From our cobblestone streets to our stately homes, discover Savannah's maritime history and what makes Savannah, Savannah. One of the hidden secrets of Savannah is the Gardens of the Ships of the Sea Museum. Picnic here and enjoy our complimentary Wi-Fi. More information can be found at shipsofthesea.org.
All right, we are back, everybody, and you're listening to the Adam Messer Show here with my special guest, Nicole Givens Kurtz, and I'm your host, Adam Messer. And, you know, Nicole, I feel like that's a really good thing to hear, that, you know, that you feel like those are going to be, you know, long-lasting systemic changes. You know, something that some of my friends have described, like it's exhausting to be like ever vigilant.
Yes.
And you know, that's something that I feel like is important too, because, you know, we're talking about publishing, but this is not just publishing. I mean, it's just the system, everything. And the reason why I've been, you know, wanting to talk about like change and things like that is because I feel like it is important to, you know, to ask and to listen and try to be like, okay, well, you know, because I'm gonna have my opinions and I'm gonna have my thoughts. You're gonna have your opinions and your thoughts, and you're gonna have a different perspective on these issues than I am, for sure. I mean, like, there's stuff that you've lived through that I will never live through. And what I'm asking is, how can we apply that to not just in publishing, but how can we apply that to, you know, what we're doing, how we're living, and how we can make the future better for everybody? I know it's a big question. I just want to see. I'm just wanting to see, because, like, I feel like, you know, we're talking about change and stuff like that, and I would really like it to be where it's a level playing field for everybody, and that, you know, your merit and your character are what help you rise or fall, not necessarily your skin color or your socioeconomic status, you know, classism, those kind of things. There's a lot of different, you know, things, but racism is, you know, probably the key factor that keeps a lot of people from being able to be successful in things. But, you know, what are some steps like people can take in like their daily lives to, you know, try to make these same kind of changes, you know, how we can make things better for everybody?
It's it's a huge step, because what it requires is self-reflection, and you working on yourself to improve who you are. And address your internal biases. And so my husband is is white, like the whitest white guy ever, because he's like 98% German Scottish. So you know, so he's but one of the things is being raised in a system in the United States that has systematic racism. A lot of those thoughts and beliefs and stuff are internalized unconsciously, because everyone's doing it or it's taught that way in school or what have you. But one of the things he and I constantly talk about, not constantly, but we consistently discuss, is ways that he is addressing and unlearning some of those biases. And he was doing that work before we met. He's been doing that work his whole life, but it is a lifelong work to kind of reject and address, certain behaviors. It's the same with misogyny. It's the same with racism. Those things are inherent because we have a society where those things are a part of the system. And so being able to change those things is an internal act of kind of deprogramming yourself. And you do that by, again, diversifying the people you're around. You do that by self-education. You do that by reading books about things and learning and never stop doing that. But it is a lifelong endeavor, and it is exhausting. But it is also equally, if not more so, exhausting to be Black in America, right? Because we never get the opportunity to turn it off, to not be vigilant, to not be, we don't get that opportunity.
That's what I was talking about when I said that.
So
my friends, my African American friends, because I mean, like they do talk about like it's exhausting. I mean, like
it is. And
like I've never had a white person say that to me. Like, oh, it's exhausting to be white. I've never had that.
But it is a constant. So for people who want to, how do we change that as a people in the United States? We have to, 70 million people think that it's okay to be racist. So I think that one of the things we need to address, first and foremost, is the systematic racism that exists. I mean, dismantling some of those institutions and changing them will take what we see in publishing on a microscopic scale is we see diversifying who's in the room.
Right.
And so you change systems by changing who's in charge of those systems. And then once those people are in charge, they can change, regulations, guidelines, rules, how they do things. And so to be more open, to be more inclusive. And so without that, there's two fronts. We fight this on two fronts. First is on an individual level, right? And on a family level and on a friends level, right? And then we also fight it on a national level, right? In terms of our governments, in terms of who our systems, our institutions, we fight and challenge. And there are certain groups that do that on the daily, like the ACLU, the Southern Poverty Law Center. There are several other groups that are on the forefront of confronting and calling out misinformation, racism, misogyny, abuses of power. That's what they do. And so support those groups that do that frontline work. Support groups and I think that a lot of people let things go when they're with their family and friends. If someone says something racist, they just, I don't want to get into it with Bob, and Bob's my uncle, and he's my grandfather, or he's my brother, or whatever. I don't want to get into it with them because that's my family, and they've always been that way. Well, it takes courage to confront it and say, hey, you know what, that's not okay. And many people aren't comfortable doing that because they don't want to lose their family. They don't want to get in an argument. It's the holidays or whatever. But every time you let that go, you may not be able to change Bob, but your little cousin Stacy, who's watching that, thinks it's okay.
I've had in my own life, I've actually stood up against racism. I don't tolerate it. Especially at work. I don't tolerate it in my personal life. Like I said, I don't like being around people who are prejudiced or racist at all. And last year, so many people, I was just like, delete, unfriend. I don't even talk to them. I'm like, find out like they're like that, and I didn't think they were like that or whatever. But I've had instances where at work, where I've said something when somebody says something racist, or they tell a joke and they think it's funny or whatever, and then I've been ostracized afterwards because of it. And, I don't regret one bit. And, I'm not saying this because I want to be a champion or a hero or anything like that. I'm not saying that. I'm just talking about real life of what has happened in my life.
Mm-hmm.
And, and it is, like you said, it takes courage. It's like, not even so much for me, it was more courage. It was more like I was disgusted by somebody acting like that. Especially, when you're talking about, who's in the room. Like, it happens a lot when, people are not around. Like, if I'm the only, person in the room, it doesn't happen. If I'm not the only person in the room, then it does happen, right? And I'm not talking about me. I'm just talking about in general, right? And it's one of those things where it's like, if it's not okay if the person's in the room, then it's not okay when they're not in the room.
Agreed.
And I don't know. That's like kind of a hot button for me, because I'm just like, I don't know how people can feel like that, and they don't know anything. I mean, like, it's like, well, why are you so
I think it's important too that some people are like, well, how do I support? I don't want to march. I don't want to be outside. I don't want to. There are many ways to advocate and support these our efforts for racial equality and for just human rights. So you can do that a variety of ways. It doesn't always require you to be out, right? Marching. You can continue to write your congressman. You can continue to, or congressperson. You could continue to, like, if you have money, to give money to the ACLU, give money to, Black Lives Matter, give money to Southern Poverty Law Center, who actively fight, these systematic changes that we're trying to invoke. And so, and they challenge those, those isms. So I think that you can, there are a variety of ways to do that without, at your comfort level. But I specifically think that it is an act of courage. I know that there are
I
many
agree with
people
you.
who
I agree with
discuss, the loss of contact with family members. People don't speak to their parents anymore.
Oh, I know, Nicole, I know some kids, like young people, and I say kids, but I know some young people who are transgender, and when they came out, it was like their families acted like they were just dead to the world. And I'm like, how do you just throw away a person? I don't understand it, especially me being a parent. I cannot understand how anybody could just disavow their child like that. And
I don't know.
I don't understand it. I mean, like, it's one of those things that really upsets me and makes me sad about it. And for them to come out, I've never had that kind of courage. I'm a brave person. I'm a courageous person. I've never had that kind of courage. There's a lot of things that I've never had that kind of courage, because I've never lived that life or been in those shoes, or seen it from that perspective, because that's not me. I'm not a transgender person. I don't understand what they're going through because I've never been through it. I'm not African American. I don't understand it. I'm not a woman. I don't understand it because I'm not through there. But I can empathize. Right. I can empathize with them. I can say, hey, I don't know what you're going through firsthand, but I can empathize because guess what? I'm a person. And I feel like empathy is a huge step, as well, as because I feel like a lot of people disassociate, and they dehumanize other people, is what I see happening. And when they dehumanize that other person, then it becomes, like a box of freight or whatever. And they're like, oh, well, this person is not important or whatever. And that's how they are able to rationalize it.
Yes.
And I don't like that. I feel like it's like, an evil that, I wish we could just extinguish that evil and be done with it. But I know that that's not real. So I feel like it's important every day to try to do what we can to treat other human beings with dignity and respect and courtesy. And I feel like that's so important. I mean, I know it's so crazy. We're talking about storytelling, but isn't our life, like all about the stories that we talk about with ourselves and with others? And I mean, like, we're storytelling beings.
So I think Dr. Fauci said, I don't know how to explain to you that you should care for other people.
Right. Like, if you don't feel that way, it's like, I can't. But then then this is the thing that I see too. Like I saw a video the other day. There was this guy. He was racist when he was younger, and his daughter had a biracial child, and he loved his grandson. And that was like the first, black person that he had ever felt feelings for or cared about, right? And so his grandson grows up, and then this guy changed his ways. Him and his wife ended up adopting a couple of young African American kids. And this guy, he changed like that. He can't change the fact that, how he was before and being racist and all that. But I was like, how do we get to that point where these folks that, have this hatred or whatever in their heart, and they don't see other people as human beings? How do we get to the point where it's like, hey, wait a minute? And I feel like a lot of the points that you brought up today are so valid and so real, just from the simple stuff of like using Google. You know what I mean? It's like, well, if you look at the books that you've been reading and you look at like where you're getting your influencing from, which we're all being influenced, right? It's crazy. But if that's the same thing, like, if you're eating a bologna sandwich every day of the week and you think bologna is the only kind of luncheon meat that's out there, you're missing out on like 99% of what else is out there.
Yeah.
Hey, let me do the station ID real quick. Everybody, we're listening today to WRU LP Savannah, Georgia, 107.5 FM, WRU.org. We are Savannah Soundings Community Radio with Global Soul. So I feel like, the stuff that you've been sharing is really good, and it's also important. And as well as like, there are more people like yourself who are trying to put it out there and say, hey, you know what? There are different stories out here. There are stories from people like me that look like you, and I'm saying it in general. And I'm just saying, like, for you, you're publishing or whatever. There are people like me, quote unquote, that are publishing. How do we keep, because it's a long fight, right? Like you said, how do we keep that renewed interest, and how do we keep that going? Not just for today or tomorrow or 6 months from now. How do we keep that going where it's like, the landscape changes and looks different, 10 years from now, 5 years from now, a year from now?
So the fight for equality and human rights is always ongoing.
Right.
People think like the civil rights movement happened and then we were good, but the 70s were fraught with racial inequality, and also so were the 80s. It just depends on, again, who's telling the story, right? Who's telling the story. So if you look at African American history, which of course is a part of American history that they don't have in textbooks, but if you dig, I mean, even if you look, there were continued fights for equal rights and equality throughout the 70s and 80s. It just wasn't publicized in the manner in which you saw it in the 60s. But there was still, because there were other conversations about, well, now we're integrated, everything's fine. And so to go against that rhetoric or that propaganda, in more words, is probably a better word. Again, in our current society, which is very much a social media, minefield, there's information 24/7 everywhere. The way that we can continue to amplify the fight is to continue to spotlight and highlight when those works and those efforts, right? You continue to say, hey, this is what we're still fighting for. And you'll see that. You'll see that on Facebook where people will post, hey, Breonna Taylor still doesn't have, or you'll see conversations where this is still an issue. This is still a problem. And I see younger people taking up the mantle. I see it with my own sons who are both 19, picking up that mantle and continuing to say, hey, we're still pushing for equality. And so I think the way it continues is that torch gets passed from the current generation to the younger generation to pick it up and keep it moving. You see that with the fight for climate change. And so I remember when Al Gore's An Inconvenient Truth came out, and now I see other kids, younger kids, taking that same message, retooling it and saying the urgency is a lot more real and championing that cause. So that's how it stays in the forefront, is that one generation, and it keeps getting that torch, keeps getting that, well, the megaphone really keeps getting passed from one group to the next.
Yeah, I agree with you. I feel like it's such an important thing to invest in the children in the future too, because, you know, like here I am, I'm 44. You know, I look at my son, my daughters, and hopefully that, you know, I was able to pass on those, you know, good values and morals and things like that. And I see these kids, like I love TikTok. I mean, I'll be honest with you, I love it. I see these kids on there, and I see, you know, a lot of African American people on there, and indigenous peoples on there, and they're talking about, you know, like how they bring up these social issues and these different, you know, people. Well, I say social issues, I should say people issues, and these different things, and you know, like it's so crazy how like a platform like that can be more hyper aware of different things that are going on because of the I don't know how to say it, like because of the video platform and the way people do it. I mean, it's not, TikTok is not just about like dancing and lip syncing and all that stuff. There's a lot of folks on there who are talking about, like, you know, growth and, you know, change and a lot of things like that. And I think it's pretty cool that younger folks are taking to, you know, different forms of media and taking up that mantle and, you know, that megaphone, like you said, and being able to get the word out there and just say, hey, you know what, we're not going to take it. Like, you know, that old song, we're not going to take it anymore.
Yeah.
Yeah. Like that.
Absolutely. They're definitely like, if you see the K-pop fans, how they have like taken over other different like harmful hashtags and
I love it.
With it. There's so much that, again, that's how I really firmly believe, having been a teacher of secondary education for 20 years, that's how you get kids, that's how you keep it out there, and that's how you keep the fight for human rights and equality going, is with that younger generation.
That's amazing, Nicole. I really appreciate you. I always feel like I learned something when we talk from you, and I appreciate you being willing to share, because, you know, like you said, it does take courage. I feel like you're very courageous too, because, you know, it's not easy, you know, and I mean, it's not easy to be able to talk with folks about like, hey, these are the kind of changes that we need, and not just saying this is what, you know, like the surface versus, you know, authentic changes, that kind of thing. Mm-hmm. It's not easy, you know, because you have a platform, you know, you put things out there. And, you know, when you're putting it out there, you know, you got to believe in what you're doing. And I feel like you do believe in what you're doing. You know what I mean? And I really appreciate that. Yeah, no, seriously, like you're a very authentic person to me. And I appreciate, you know, that you do that, because we need more voices like that where people can listen and, you know, that they can act upon it. You know, I mean, I feel like it's not just good enough to say, hey, you know, yeah, I'm aware of the change. It's like, well, then do something. You know, make a change. Do you know, take a step. Like I love how you said earlier, you know, people that don't want to march or they can't march or, you know, they're not able to or whatever. There's other ways that they can support, you know, the community. And everybody, I feel like, can do in their own level of support. So I appreciate you so much, Nicole. Thank you very much.
Oh, thanks for having me. I love our talks. So,
one last question: where's the best place people could check out like the new book? Because we didn't even really talk about books this last 2 hours. But where can they check out your writing?
So they can find my writings at Amazon, of course, but you can also find it on my website at NicoleGivensKurtz.net.
Awesome! Thank you so much, Nicole. We gotta transition out, but I really appreciate you, and thank you very much for coming on the show today.
All right, thanks for having me.